Hello, thank you for joining me today. My name is Alexi Bailey, and I have a very special guest today on the Tell It Like It Is podcast. His name is Victor Custodio. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's an honor.
Yeah, man. We go way back, man. It's been too long.
Way too long, my brother. Way too long.
Yeah, I mean, we seen each other go through different ways, man. When we met, you were in grad school, finishing up. How did it go? You did your CS, the MSW. Did you got your licensing?
No, I'm going for my licensing. I took forever and a day to get there because of work. And to be
Life.
quite honest, I was just done with school after my grad. I spent 3 years going to my being a full-time employee, having a full-time school, and having internship. I remember sometimes I didn't see my family for weeks because every time that you come home, everybody's sleeping.
In and out, yeah.
So in and out, you know what I mean? And I was just tired. So I if I looked at a book, I just kind of like threw up in my mouth. I was like, nah, I'm done, bro. Uh, but that was a mistake that I did looking back, because now I have to, kind of like take
Refresh.
everything back. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, let me show you one thing. I have it here, even on vacation.
Yeah, the life is following us, man.
So I'm reading it at a snail's pace, because you have to get into for the juices to get back into it. You know what I mean? So,
But if nothing else, you have that real life experience. So, you know, the test is one thing, but I think you're more qualified than someone who's like these, 23-year-old who went straight from undergrad, finished this grad school, and now they're taking the test. And you've been at it for a long time.
yeah, 22 years I've been a social worker. So I remember when I started my career, we didn't even have computers. Everything was handwritten. So as you know, there's some people that write if they put their pen on their toes, and forget about a doctor. You just sit there and try to be like, oh my God, what does this person is trying to say? And then I was working in a family shelter, and that's when we got the first computers and the first set of database, and it blew my mind. I was like, wow, I don't have to decipher anything anymore. um, so that's how it went.
You're making it sound like 1987.
Oh boy, it's close by there. Okay, it's close
Let
by
me let
there.
me let me ask you this, okay? Now, when I tell my story to people, I say like, oh, I was a social worker in the city. I worked in homeless services, but I think like I only scratched the surface. Like you've been New York City doing homeless services for how
Well,
long?
well, like 22 years. I started my career with the Salvation Army, and well, actually, excuse me, I started my career in working in the Bell Family Center. Is isolated shelter in the middle of nowhere, very close to the airport. Um,
JFK?
because yeah, JFK. They like to isolate the homeless community and keep them away, out of sight, out of mind,
Yeah.
basically.
Nobody wants that
Um,
near their house. Property values and
nobody,
all that. Yeah.
nobody. And as you experience the social system, the benefits and everything, you understand kind of like the pros and cons. You have to take yourself out of it and be very objective and think about it. Like, if you had small children, would you want a homeless shelter near you? Of course, most people would say no. um so it's a very delicate balance that everybody got to do in relationship to providing services for family, um or children or teenagers. But I'll be honest with you, every day that I go to work, I know that I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I could be homeless in a couple of hours. I have families that were rich, but the house burned down, and you can't go to the bank and say, "Hey, I'm so and so, give me $100,000." If everything burned down, so every day that I go into work, I know that I could be servicing my mother, my wife, or my child, God forbid, or myself. I could be sitting there, and it gives you a good perspective on how to approach a client, especially during difficult times.
Now, you were in a DV shelter at this was 2011.
Around there, like I said, I started my career with Bell Family Center, and then I moved to the Salvation Army, and I worked in group homes in Harlem. After the group homes, I got hired with Help USA, and I started working in the Hamilton shelter, where it was basically a hotel, and they had turned it into a shelter, and it was very lucrative, because they make money. Most providers are nonprofit, but you do give a living to the social workers, the maintenance, the safety, all those different type of people. You they're employed, and they're able to provide food and shelter for their families. After the Hamilton, then I went to work in Helps Haven, which is a domestic violence shelter, and people trying to come in. Um, After that, I went to work in HelpSec, and I was working with single males and also sex offenders. I did that for about 4 years. Then I finished my master's, and I got a promotion. I went to work in home base, which is homeless prevention. I was working right there in the Bronx by the Bronx Community College, and I did that for another 4 years, I believe. And then I got my current position. I'm working in Help Women's Center, which is an assessment shelter for single women.
Assessment off the street?
Yeah. We get them fresh. We get them, if you are a homeless, you find yourself in a homeless situation, and you're a single female, you go to two assessments centers, which is either in the Bronx, which is Franklin Shelter, or in East New York, that's where I work, and 116 Williams Avenue, and you're provided as you come into the door. And a lot of the clients walk through many different doors before they get there. You got to think about the human experience. Nobody wants to be in a shelter, so they feel very defeated, or they went couch surfing, they try to stay with friends and family. They even slept in the park sometimes. So it's very, very rough. Or we get women that have been homeless, street homeless for 10 years, and they just need a little bit of break if they come in. We get domestic violence. We got a lot of mental health. I'll be quite honest with you. The bulk of my clients, I would say, had, some type of mental health, but who doesn't? You know what I mean? Everybody got something. Nobody's perfect. Then you also have your run of substance abuse, domestic violence. We get a lot of domestic violence. People coming from other countries, people coming from other states, thinking that Section 8 is very easy. You just come in, where's my voucher, where's my apartment, and I don't have to pay no rent. I had a lot of clients come in like that, thinking like that. And I'll be quite honest with you, in the current position where I am right now, I utilize all my social work skills that I had learned through the years on a daily basis. So it's very intense. You have to have thick skin, and you have to have empathy, because you have to understand where the client is coming from. Because you could be sitting in their chair, and if your mother, your wife, or God forbid, your daughter was sitting in that chair, You want them to be treated with respect and courtesy. But as a social worker, you also have to kind of like ask them for that courtesy as well, because I I can't tell you how many times I had clients just come in. I would say like 9 out of 10 clients come into my desk, and how you engage them, the approach that you guys engage them, they become, very compliant. They understand that you understand where they're coming from. But every now and again, you get a client that is just used to being very hostile. And if you put a stop to it right there and there, and you engage the client and you give them a lot of choices, then, they might have to cool off for a couple of minutes before you are able to engage them.
Um, yeah, man. I mean, I have to speak to your level of professionalism, man. I know you're a well-rounded guy, and when we worked together, I learned a lot from you during that time. You were the social worker I wanted to be.
The,
Honestly.
the checks is in the mail, Bailey. The checks in the mail. I got it. I got it, baby.
But so again, I always talk about my social work experience, and because when I was in school, I wanted to help, but I studied psychology. I wanted to help. And then when I got out of school, I was looking for opportunities, and someone from my church um, referred me to Covenant House.
Mm.
So that was my first experience out of school. Anyone who doesn't know, Covenant House is a shelter for under 21 youth. So the reason why you need a shelter for under 21 youth is because imagine a 19-year-old girl in a shelter with a 42-year-old woman. It's like, so it's kind of like a buffer zone before you release them into the wild of shelterism life, kind of, and trying to catch it early. It's a different population, I would say.
Very much so. But also, we also get a lot of elderly clients now. It's very sad because I had one particular client that was, I believe, 82 years old,
Wow.
and she worked for the city for many, many, many years. I mean, like this lady worked for the city for like 40 years, full pension. She was able to buy a home, and a family member ended up stealing the pension, losing her house because they were taking the mortgage money and using them for
Wow.
whatever,
Yeah.
for substances. And this person dropped off this client in the front door and told her, "I'll be right back," and just left her there. And not only that, they continued to steal the pension. So it's a very sad. We beginning to see a lot of that. Um, a lot of those cases. For those of you that don't know, APS is Adult Protective Services.
Mhm.
They are kind of like ACS, Advocate for Children's Services, because there's a lot of elder abuse as well. Well, as we get older, we kind of reverse to our younger selves, and we become dependent on our loved ones. And if our loved ones don't have our best interests at heart, that could create a lot of problems.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I said, right, was that there's a lot of people who are homeless in New York City by choice because there is a place for them to go. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you got family members, but also,
Meaning shelter wise, there's a place for them to go in a shelter.
yes, everybody is entitled to shelter in New York City. Probably one of the few cities in the world where a shelter is mandated. I went to California, Skid Row, because I'm a social worker. I
Right.
become very curious about things like that, and they give you a permit to set up a tent.
Mm.
And there's about 2 square miles of nothing but tents. And you do see a lot of like substance abuse, crime. But the thing that breaks my heart, like I would say every 5 tent, there's a family there, and they're usually undocumented. And you have a father, a mother, and 2 small children living in an environment like this. It can become, the human being, when you're presented with a real difficult choice that you cannot go forward, you either excel or it breaks you down. So a lot of these children are broken down, but a lot of them also rise to the challenge and become better persons. They 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 come out of that situation, and amazingly, that old saying, "You pull yourself by your bootstraps," and I see that a lot as well.
Um, so I also said that a lot of people, let's say you live in Missouri, Omaha, I don't know, Texas, whatever, the word gets out that New York City has these amazing facilities for people who are homeless, and they save up, they get money, they spend their last, pawn whatever to get on the bus to New York City. So New York City, you have a lot of people who like just got off the Greyhound bus to be homeless.
Literally, or they were brought here because they were hanging around the airport too much, and the airport police or DHS pay for a cab to take them to the shelter. um, so you see that a lot, but you also see a lot of severe mental health, and I'm talking about, like, the access ones. I'm really old school, so I still use access.
Okay.
The DSM-4 that's
Oh, yeah.
gone, but you see a lot of schizophrenia, bipolar, um, schizoaffective. One of the worst ones that I see, the diagnosis that I see, is psychosis. And psychosis is a clear break with reality.
Mm.
Now, this person, for whatever reason, thinks that, they're putting things in the food, or, like, God told them to come to New York to save the universe. And they come here, and they haven't been on medication for many, 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 many years. And once they get there, they're very easily triggered, and they could become somewhat hostile sometimes, very few cases. Um, and they need to be baseline. So what baseline is, if you have an access one diagnosis, and you end up in a situation where you're engaged with the police, with hospital staff, they do and you're like in a very, very difficult place. uh, they will do a EDP, emotionally disturbed person,
Mhm.
and they usually take you to the CPAP, which is the kind of like the emergency room for psychiatric,
Right.
psychiatric crisis. I forget the acronym,
Right.
but usually what they do, they bring you in. You haven't slept for many days, or like you having auditory, visual hallucinations. They don't know your medical history, so what ends up happening, they give you a shot of Haldol. You sleep for a couple of hours or a couple of days, and it takes about 30 days for the medication to really start kicking in, but it does calm you down. And then they could observe you, and it's kind of like a cookie cutter process. So you come in, you get, boom, you move on, and then the hospital will send you to a homeless shelter.
Um, there's a lot of people who are avoiding going into shelter. They're living
Yes.
on the street and they're avoiding going into shelter. Why do you think that is?
Well, the shelter system is tough. Um, I would say a lot of veterans are also on the subways and streets, and they have a lot of benefits. But I would say that there's a lot of rules and regulations that are unknown to you. But when you get there, you have to engage with a social worker. You have to engage with a case manager, a housing specialist. You have to open a public assistance, and the key is housing in shelter system. housing, because it's cheaper for the city to have you in your own personal home than, in a shelter, because it costs money. So the shelter system is kind of like training wheels, get you independent, but a lot of people cannot deal with that type of structure, especially when you have mental health, or you have substance abuse, or you have PTSD because you're in a domestic violence situation, because domestic violence is a fatal condition that you cannot go certain places because your batterer is following you. So there's I would say a multiple of the reasons that people don't go into the shelter system is for structure, and it could be a little challenging. So our job, and mainly what I do when I engage a client like that, I tell them, it's all about your perspective as well. Because if you come into the shelter system with a dark cloud over your head, woo, boo hoo, always me, you're not gonna have a good engagement, right? So I tell them, listen, let's be thankful that we got a roof over our heads. We have DHS police in the front. You have social work. I don't want nothing from you. All I want to do is help you. And you're a taxpayer. You've been paying taxes for all your life, and this is the benefits to that, to being, and it entitles the client to feel, like they're not there for a handout.
Right.
They're there to get better and become a part of society once again. Rejoin the community, as we say.
Um, so much, so much of this. There's a lot of people out there who I think, who I know are working, getting themselves together, trying their best. But New York City is a very hard place to reintegrate into.
It's very expensive. It's very, very, very expensive. Um, so let's say for a studio, you cannot afford the city anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Unless you have a good paying job. Because for a studio, depending where in the city, you go anywhere from like 1,800 to $5,000 for a studio. So you were kind of like on the fringes now, like, you're looking towards the Bronx. You can't afford Brooklyn no more. Brooklyn is the second city. Queens is mainly residential, so you see a lot of families going into basement apartments or things like that. Um, but it's also, you have to kind of like break down a lot of preconceived notions that the client has. Like, you have to kind of like teach them how to budget. Like, the first thing that you have to pay is your rent, otherwise you're going to be homeless again. you know but I went to a training, and it was very interesting, because one, when you're looking from the outside, you could become very judgmental and be like, oh, how come they don't pay their rent? That's the first thing. You know what I mean? But think about your own life. How many times do you buy something that you shouldn't? Like, I'm
Right.
gonna go to Starbucks and I
Right.
want that latte, right? The latte, right? But you know that you shouldn't pay $25 for a cup of coffee, bro. But
Right.
you're gonna do it anyway. So you want, the Apple Watch or whatever the case is. You know what I mean? We just humans. We like nice things.
Right.
But we gotta like, it's our job as social workers to kind of like educate the client to our best of our abilities. And there might be a frequent flyer, as they say. You know what I mean? In home base, we used to pay the back rent for clients, in order for them not to be evicted, and not enter the shelter system. So that was very challenging in itself, because when it comes to money, as you already know, money usually brings out the worst in people. Never the best, always the worst.
Right. Right.
So somebody owes $8,000 in back rent. They want that paid right now, custodio. I want hundreds and fifties. And I want it in cash. So I might pay my landlord, I might not. um, but it's difficult. Um, but you learn, you for any experienced social workers that I'm gonna come in, I've been very blessed to have interns. Now I'm, instead of me being the intern, I'm teaching people.
Right.
So I always tell them social work is easy. The clients are easy. The hardest part about being a social worker is the people you work with, you know, and that's the truth. The closely followed by paperwork. A social worker lives and dies by their paperwork. So if you don't make a note, it never happened. You know, you could have the best encounter in the universe, but if you didn't make that notation in the system, it never happened. And then the system is set up very quickly um, for, you know, let's not find a way how to resolve it. Who's to blame? You didn't do that. You didn't do that. You didn't do this. That's been my experience in multiple agencies where I work. It's never about like, let's look at this, you know.
Yeah,
It's
let's learn
mainly
from this, do what's best for the client. It's like, no,
nah,
no, no, it's all your fault.
it's all your fault, you know. And if something comes out of it, you're gonna lose your job. So it's difficult. So you kind of like always have to watch where you're going. And you know, you if you follow the procedures that are implemented, you will stay out of trouble. You know what I mean? But you know, we all humans. You know, sometimes you got the time, sometimes you don't. But you have to try your best and stick to certain very simple rules. You know, as soon as you meet the client leaves, you're documented that encounter right afterwards. Before the roof case in, before the asteroid hits, you have to make that documentation.
But
Otherwise, you could find yourself in a real
while
trouble.
you're meeting with that client, you have six other calls, six other people knocking on your door, something you were doing before they walked in.
That's
And
right.
and now they walk in, they leave, you're supposed to document right away. But as they step out the door, your supervisor walks in and another client telling you this is happening now. So it 90% of the time it doesn't happen the minute the client walks out. Like, I'm just going to close my door and write a note, excuse me. That does not happen.
Yeah, it doesn't happen, but you gotta make the time for it. You know what I mean? Especially with the mandate supervisors that you're gonna do it not now, but right now. Like, okay, give me 2 seconds. Let me write this case note, and it'll be my pleasure and honor to serve it. No, you're gonna no. You know, is like, you know, unless there's a bone sticking out of the skin, you're gonna give me my 2 minutes. You know, even if it's just a two-sentence note, you
Yeah.
have to do it. You know what I mean? And you know, if that supervisor continues to do that, you know, you have to speak, because the lines of communication, I'm a supervisor now, so the lines of communications have to be open. Hey, listen, you know, I get it, that was an emergency, but we cannot have multiple emergencies every single time. You know what I mean? We have to find a balance. um, Becoming a social worker for me is one of the most, I would say, it saved my life for me personally. Um, because like you, I wanted to help. You know, you don't become a social worker to make millions of dollars. It's just not gonna happen. Even if you run your own shelter, it's not gonna happen. You can make hundreds of thousands of dollars maybe, but you're not gonna be like rolling in the dough. You
Unless you're
become a
doing the
social
wrong
worker.
thing.
Yeah, then you know, the lawyer is gonna get all that money. Uh, you become a social worker because, you know, you have a sense of love for your fellow human being. And you know, I remember people telling me, oh, you got to check yourself at the door, check your stuff at the door. You know, every day that I go into work, I look for a hook to check my personality at the door, my proudness at the door. You know, I could have had an argument with my wife or my children or a family member. I never seen those hooks. And also, you take your previous experiences and you apply them to current experiences. So becoming a social worker, it's a passion. You know what I mean? Some people become firefighters, police officers, because it's their calling. I became a social worker because it was my calling, and it saved my life. You know, helping others really helps myself. You know, I never had no qualms in telling people that I'm me personally, I'm a recovered alcoholic. You know, it took 2 years for me to get sober. You know, and doing all of this, I'm juggling a job, a marriage, rent, children, you know what I mean? So it becomes very, very tough. But I'm in the point in my life where helping others helps me more than helping them, if that makes sense. So helping somebody else empowers me to help myself. So I thank God every day when I get, like, during the pandemic, um, I was picking up staff at 4:30 in the morning because there were no trains, there were no buses.
Mm.
So I will have to go pick up the kid, the staff, and bring them to the shelter. And my wife is an accountant. She was working from home. And I used to tell her, like, look how blessed we are. 30 million Americans are out of the job right now, and we got jobs. And we have the opportunity to make overtime, you know. And being a social worker has opened a door for me, and it has given me the ability to, feed my children. I'm a homeowner now, buy a property, uh, and thank God, Help USA gave me that opportunity, and they had tuition reimbursement, and I did my internship in my own, in Help USA, so they even did that for me, and it's just, I'm in a place where I couldn't think about doing anything else. It's very rewarding for me. For me, it's very rewarding. Like, I tell stories to people, and they're like, "How can you do that every day?" And I'm like, it's a pleasure. It helps me more than them. I had 3 cases where a client was literally overdose, OD in the bathroom. So I get the call over the radio, and we have an unresponsive client. If I'm a little fat, so you never see me move that fast. So I'm running up the stairs, and I'm like, "Sweet Lord Jesus," and, like, it's the funny things that go into your head, like, all that paperwork I'm gonna do. You know what I mean? That's running up. The client was slumped over, like, she was dead, like dead, because with the fentanyl, that has taken a toll on the community. So we put the client down, and this is in the women's bathroom, and I start doing CPR, because that's the training just kicks in, you know what I mean?
Right.
As I'm doing CPR, I'm doing chest compressions, and I'm human, you know what I mean? I gotta, at the end of the day, I gotta go back to my family. So I was gonna do mouth to mouth, but then I look at the client, I'm like, "Please come back."
Right.
So we give her 2 shots of Narca. Narca, for anybody that doesn't know, is it kind of, so when you do fentanyl, it relaxes your body to the point that you cannot breathe no more. So the Narca kind of like stops that and allows you to your muscles to start moving. So we hit her with 2 Narca, and as soon as I was about to do the mouth to mouth, she coughed. She did what we call a death gargle, like kind of those things, and she came out of it. And it was so surreal, because her skin color was lavender. She was literally, her eyes were milky. And then when we hit her with the Narca, she came pink, like a little pig. And the first thing that she said to me is, "Where's my bag?" Because she had all her stuff in her bag.
Yeah.
And and I was just thankful that you got to help somebody. That day you got to help somebody. And I had 2 other cases like that. The last case, she was on the 4th floor. Whew. When I got up there, I needed CPR. But this is some of the things that you're gonna be experiencing as a social worker. In the Hamilton place, we had sudden the crib death. I forgot the acronym, but all I saw was like 5 cops, like, and then I saw the same 5 cops holding a little baby this big.
Right.
Unfortunately, the child died. There was nothing but they were doing chest compressions, you
Right.
know what I mean? I also had a client that, you know, did something very, very bad because of the mental health. It ended up that um, there was a 5-month-old baby that passed away.
Mm,
So, if you want to help, right? But like when they say in an airplane, if the airbags drop, put your mask on first, and
right.
then you could help somebody else.
Right.
So you gotta learn how to disconnect. Once you leave the job, you gotta learn to leave it there. You gotta learn to family time. You gotta learn how to disconnect to the best of your abilities. Me personally, the way I disconnect, I like handball. So I play a lot of handball, and my family always complains that I'm playing handball all the time. And I always tell them the story of Hercules. And Hercules in Greek mythology went crazy and murdered his wife and two sons. And I was like, "Do you want me to go Hercules?" And they're like, "Oh, no, 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 Dad. Go play. Clean the house when you get back, Dad." I'm like, "Okay, I'll clean the house. I'll be, mellow." But there's little tricks that the books don't tell you. So I congratulate you on this podcast because some of the things that we are discussing, it will take you many, many years to figure that out. So
Yeah.
this is excellent that you bring in this to people that have been on the job many years or people that are thinking about coming into the field. Is very educating.
I know, man, I applaud you for the work, man. A big, big, big shout for all of that. I I don't know. There's so many things. Like when it comes to homeless services, I didn't really see it coming, right? So graduated school and I was just like, oh, okay, I'll start working there. And with the younger population, they were in high school like last week, last month, a year ago. Like they're kids still, right? So they're just experimenting a little bit with stuff. They're just getting introduced to stuff. Um, but there's this whole dark world out there, and basically you're the cleanup man. So I think you have two different kinds of people. You have people who are on the straight and narrow, but that random fire happened, or their apartment got flooded. Like they're able to they're in the shelter, but they're not in that lifestyle. Whereas you have people who's I I try to explain to people like there's a mother out there with 3 kids who hasn't worked in 15 years. And they're like, well, how does she do it? I'm like, she's borrowing money. It's a crazy system out here. And people have no idea about this whole world that exists out there. They know that there's a shelter and there's a homelessness, but it's like it's not on TV. It doesn't exist in people's minds, but it's surreal. Like I know people who are social workers in a hospital, and basically you come in with a broken leg, and they like help you find like a physical therapist on the outside. Like there's a whole different world out
And there's also a lot of preconceived notions about homelessness. You know what I mean? Homeless people are lazy. I hear that all the time. They want to be homeless. They want to be in the shelter system. Their parents were in the shelter. You know what I mean? The shelter babies. Like, and I had clients that, and I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that's not the case because in very, very, very rare cases, that's true. You know what I mean? But I would say the vast majority are people, good, hardworking people that just ran into a little problem. You know what I mean? And they're trying their best. I would say the vast majority of my cases are hardworking, good people. You're gonna run into that knucklehead every once in a while, but it's the human experience that they want to focus on the bad ones. You know what I mean? Oh, this person has multi felonies, you know what I mean? He's a career criminal. So they're gonna target that specific case and apply it across the board. That's not the case, you know what I mean?
So I give
So
New York
you know,
City, I give New York City credit for having the level of attention that they do and towards homelessness. They're they're at least putting a lot of resources towards that. And one of the things that I try to explain to people is that, it costs more to house someone for a year in the shelter than to give them a free apartment.
yes, hands down.
And and
But
is the
you you
system
you 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 give that person not only shelter, but you give them services as well. That's what it costs us a little bit more.
is the system is the system working? Like, from your perspective, are you seeing that this is a great model for people, for cities, going forward? Like, is this system working? Is there a lot of recidivism?
The answer to that is yes and yes, right? The system is working. Does it have kinks? Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Name something that is perfect, but it's what we got. You know, I try to tell people get off that victim mentality, right? Woe is me, or no, thank God we got something. In other countries, oh, you're homeless, the street is right there. The street is right there. You know what I mean? You could build your little house just out of sight, out of mind. You look at other countries like, in Latin America or Bangladesh or like, the Middle East. Nobody cares if you're homeless. Nobody. You know what I mean? And you might end up dead. you know. So the system is working. Do I see a lot of recidivists? Of course. You know what I mean? Because you got to look at the human being and the environment, right? So this person might be doing good at this time, but then like the substance abuse kicks in or the mental health because or life happens, you know what I mean, and they come back in, you know what I mean. But then they're re-engaged, things are looked at, and um is the system perfect? Far from it, far from it. But it's what we got, and it does work if you really give it all your goal, you know what I mean. um you could get out of the shelter system in a couple of months. I've seen it happen, you know what I mean. I've seen it. I give you one of the best cases that I like, one of the cases that I hold on to, um because my mentor, her name was Kim Harvin. She sadly passed away, and you know like she never told nobody that she was sick, and I just one day, oh, Miss Harvin passed away. I'm like, wow. She always told me, Custodio, you're a knucklehead. So that was the first thing that, like, that's how we engage, right? Or what day is it? Custodio, you're a knucklehead is Wednesday. She always told me, Custodio, if you help one person in your entire social working career, you had a successful career. You know what I mean? And me, like a jerk, I always say, what happened if it's like, a small person? Does it still count? She's like, yes, Custodio, you're a knucklehead. It does count. You know what I mean? But like, the system works, you know what I mean? It's what we got, it, it's, it's tough. It's tough. But I have this one client. She was doing about 60 bags of heroin per day.
Six.
If you were 6 bundles, a bundle is 10 bags, so now I'm getting to the street lingo, don't ask me how I know.
You see everything. They tell you everything. I went to
don't ask
buy this one. They tell you the whole thing. Like, you get immersed in the they trust me.
I went to see Flaco. Everybody got a Flaco. Flaco is the local street pharmacist, as they call it. You know what I mean? So if you and me do 60 bags in one day, we're dead. You know what I mean? Like, we're checking out.
Yeah.
And it's a very expensive habit. Like 60 bags a day is like, it's like $600, having a $600 a day habit, it's unbelievable. So needless to say, this person was also a sex worker. That's one of the things that I also try to educate people, because when you say prostitution, it has a negative you know what I mean? So sex worker, and this person weighed like maybe 105 pounds wet, missing a couple of teeth because of the methadone and all the chemicals in the heroin, shaking like a leaf, basically hopeless. Like if you look up hopelessness due to substance abuse in the dictionary, there will be this client looking at you. Doesn't know how to read and write. That's very important. Does not know how to read and write. This woman was born in this country, went to the educational system, and doesn't know how to read and write, right? Years on the streets in Hunts Point. For those who don't know, Hunts Point used to be a hotbed of sex workers in the Bronx, lower, I would say, South Bronx, we could say. You know what I mean?
Is that gentrified now?
No, not yet, but they're getting there. So years and years and years of substance abuse, rape, abuse, many different felonies, you know what I mean? So I see this client, and your heart breaks, because that could be my mom, that could be my daughter, God forbid, and that's somebody's loved one, you know what I mean? You do the best you can, so you patch them up, and there you go, off to the world, right? I see this woman 3 years later. She says, how you doing, Custodio? Do I know you, ma'am? Have you been here? She went out the shelter system and came back in. She went to a program. This woman now weighs about 150 pounds, healthy, the tracks on the arms almost gone. You know, there's some things that you will never get rid of after 20 years, 25 years of substance abuse, but to the untrained eye, you wouldn't know it. But to a social worker, you kind of pick up the telltale signs, right? And I didn't know this woman, you know what I mean? I looked at her and I'm like, oh, have you been a client? And I named some of the shelters because I thought that maybe from there. She's like, no. I sat right there in that desk, and I was like, wow, came back from the brink of death. Death would have been something understandable. I would say damnation, because that monkey on your back, it sinks the. And she was working and as a waitress, and I was like, the conversation was like, so how do you take the orders? You know what I mean? So this person will memorize the order, will run to the kiosk, type it in, and then come right back. Making a living. You know what I mean? Came back, and it was so heartwarming that you look at this person. Anybody would have write this person off. This is a lost case. Let's like a triage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're gone. They're gone, and they came back. And that's one of the cases that when I'm having a tough day, I kind of like, reflect on it, and you never give up on somebody until they're dead.
Is there anything I'm missing? Am I missing something?
Well, for me, you gotta also learn your limits, right? It's very tough for me to work with children. Okay. It affects me because I'm a father. I love being a dad. You know what I mean? My children are my life to me. They're the reason I wake up in the morning. And funny enough, I didn't want no children, but here they are.
Yes.
I didn't want one. Then my daughter came in. I was like, I don't want no more. And then my son came in, and I was like, damn. You know what I mean? Like, can we get another one now? But no more children. I can't work with children, and I had to look at that in my own. It affects me too much. I want to adopt them all. You know what I mean? I want to bring them home. And my wife was like, "What the hell are you doing, bro? You got two of your own children." And that was very challenging when I work with sex offenders as well, because you have a daughter. And some days I would come home and my daughter would be like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Because I would just be holding her like, "I love you. You're never going outside ever again.
Oh
I'm
man.
bringing the teachers." You know what I mean? And now anybody that gets me, you're like super, like, especially with my son, because my daughter is now, she's gonna be 16 next month, and my son is gonna be 9 next month. So that was very, very challenging, and like, not to judge somebody, to give them the best services that you can. But with children, it just affects me too much. I did it. It affected me too much, so I had to get out of there and work with mainly adults. Or like that. I learned that sometimes my patience run thin when I'm dealing with a very an elderly client. So I become aware of those issues for me. So you got to learn what you like, and don't be scared to speak up, and like, and make a decision to move someplace else. Because if you go into work every day and you're miserable, once in a while it's okay. But if every day you go into work and you're like, "Oh my God," you're on the wrong field, and you're doing a disservice to the clients
Right.
and yourself. So find out what field fits for you, either in a hospital, shelter, police, whatever the case is, in the jails. Find out what you like and stick to it. That's my one of my biggest pet peeves right there.
All right. All right. Thank you so much. That was we're gonna take a break and we'll come back with part two. We'll kind of open up the conversation to more than social work. I mean, yeah, at some point I got overwhelmed with just like I was drowning in the fact that they weren't I don't think I was able to give them solutions fast enough. And I just felt like more just kept coming, and it was like 500 people were coming, and I would see like one or two get into an apartment, and like most of them would end up in a worse situation after they left, and the paperwork, and I was just like, what is this, and I was just I just, I know people will be happy with me. They smiled, I helped them, but I was drowning. I was drowning.
Well, you also have to take it into account your own ego,
Right.
because you want to help out. I'm Mr. Custodio. I'm gonna solve all your problems, and the answer is no. You know, so there's the ego aspect to engaging with clients, and there's a hierarchy as well that you have to become aware, because you're behind the desk, so you're in a position of authority, right?
Right.
Quotation marks, authority, which is, you don't have no authority to begin with. um so but you get clients vital records. You got their social security, you got their date of birth, you got all
You
their
got their life
history,
in your hands.
and you have a say so where they're going to go. So you have to realize those things. And it's customer service as well, you know what I mean? Only because you're a social worker doesn't mean that you are like, this. No, because with, like I tell client, like I tell my coworkers, nobody's irreplaceable. You get fired, they find somebody else. There's so many people, right? The only people that are like, is the grants, right? Because without a
Right.
grant, you have no building, no shelter. And the clients, without clients, you have no job.
No
You know what
program.
I
Yeah.
mean? So it's customer service. You have to provide good customer service. Now, does that mean that you have to like bow down to the client and like, jump when they say no? No, absolutely not. Like, I had clients curse me out, and I'm like, okay, I understand, but you're going to calm down and you're going to stop talking to me in that manner, because I have been nothing but respectful to you. And if you don't want to respect me, then I can't service you, especially if you're screaming at the top of your head, you know. Um, and like, my experience has been that they respect you more for it,
Right.
you know. So when you make yourself be respected, um, they recognize that, and be like, wow, he's not here for a paycheck. He's actually here to help out, and he's not gonna take no job because you could curse me out. I don't care, but we're gonna talk to each other with mutual respect. If that, like, I will do my best to calm you down, to calm the situation down. You know what I mean? There's different tactics that you could utilize. you know I understand where you're coming from. Can you tell me more, but can you lower your voice? But if none of those things work, what's the point? You know what I mean? You're just taking their negativity, and you have to realize that they're in a very emotional situation, and what you're seeing is the tip of the iceberg, right? So that behavior that you're seeing in front of your desk is the very, very tip of the iceberg. There's so many things underneath. You don't know if this person was molested as a child, if somebody died, or they were just assaulted and they couldn't do nothing about it. So here you are, and you're just a vent. So what I usually do, I let them you know, vent a little bit, and I tell them, do you feel a little bit better? Do you think that we could talk now? If not, then come back when you're ready. If you give somebody choices, you know, they usually react pretty good.
All right. We'll come back for part two, the man behind the social work, a little bit of big picture, some solutions, and how he sees things.